Hi, I'm Maggie. If you're joining me, this is part two. If you haven't watched part one, I suggest you go back there because I'm going to just pick up where I left off. So, I believe where I left off was my mom had met a gentleman and she had gotten pregnant, and it was just her and my sister and my younger brother, and we were living together for a little bit. This is where my stepfather comes onto the picture. And the first time that we met him, my mom had brought him home one night, and he never left. He ended up staying. And I remember years later, I heard him tell someone that he had fallen in love with Irene's daughters before he had fallen in love with her. And to me, that now is a huge red flag. If a man is saying that he fell in love with your children before he fell in love with you, run. So he entered our lives, and at first, he was everything that we needed. He was a great dad. We had been missing our dad, and so he jumped right in and started taking care of us and taking care of our mom. And he worked at that time very little. I think my mom was still working. And I remember there were little things that were happening. One of the things was my grandmother didn't want my mom coming around anymore if she stayed with him. My grandmother could feel something from the beginning from him. And she said, if you go back to him or if you stay with him, then you are no longer welcome in this family. And so my mom ended up moving away with him. And I remember the first time that we saw him being really aggressive was with my little brother. And my little brother was maybe a year old. And my mom had gone to work one day and left my stepdad in charge of my sister and I and our little brother. And my sister and I were outside playing. My little brother was taking a nap. And the next thing you heard was my stepfather yelling and my little brother screaming. When we went inside, the smell of shit was in the air. And you could hear my little brother screaming. And you could hear my stepfather tossing my little brother into the tub. He had got in poop from one end of the crib to the other end. And because of that, it set my stepfather off. He was not my stepfather at the time. He was still new to our house. Maybe not even a year had gone by that he had been moved in with us. But he bounced my little brother from one end of that tub to the other end, from one end to the other end. At one point, he came out of the bathroom and he told my sister and I to go into the bathroom and to clean our little brother up. When we walked into the bathroom, my little brother was covered in marks. He had literally been thrown into the bathtub. And beaten severely. When my mom got home, I don't remember anything happening. But that was our introduction to my stepfather. And then he decided that we were going to move. And I remember being in Maine, and I remember living on a side of a lake that nobody else lived on. And we had, in order to get to that house, you had to take a boat. And at this time, my mom was pregnant with my younger sister. And it was me, my older sister, and my brother still. And he moved us in the middle of Maine, way up Maine. There was no power, no electricity, no running water, no heat at this cabin that he brought us to. We stayed there for a couple of years, and he transformed the inside to a livable condition for all of us. But that's when I remember the first time that he touched me. I know I was in kindergarten because I remember going to the bus stop, and I remember getting home from school half a day and my sister coming later on in the day. So it had to have been kindergarten. And I remember during that time, some nights were really cold in that cabin. And I remember sleeping on the other side of my mom. I remember him reaching over my mom and touching me on my breast that I did not have at 5 years old. And also on my private parts. And I moved away quickly and didn't understand what was going on. But that was the first time that he touched me, with my mom beside me. Living in that cabin was sometimes very terrifying. That's where he taught my sister and I how to swim. One morning he got up and decided that he would teach us that day. And so he loaded my sister and I up into his boat, and he brought us out into the middle of this lake. And he said, "I'm going to teach you girls how to swim today. And the best way to teach you is just to put you in the water." And so that's what he did. He took turns throwing me and my sister into the water. When he threw me into the water, I went down into the black water. But then I started to doggy paddle. And I doggy paddled my whole way up to the top of the water as best as I could, as fast as I could. And I kept dropping down, and I kept coming back up, and I was gasping for air, and I was looking at him and looking at my sister and wondering when that was going to be over. Finally, he grabbed me, pulled me back up into the boat. And then it was my sister's turn. He threw my sister overboard, and my sister never came back up. He had to jump down after her. When he came back up onto the boat, he could barely breathe, and my sister was barely breathing. We almost lost our lives that day. The next traumatic thing that I remember happening at 5 years old was there was a neighbor's dog who kept coming over onto our property. And my stepfather had warned the neighbor multiple times that if his dog came back on the property, that he was going to kill the dog. And so one day, he woke up and all of the trash had been gone through. And that little Benji dog was there, and he was the one that did it. So my stepfather grabbed his shotgun, and he told me to put my shoes on. And I did. He told me to follow him. And of course, Benji the dog followed us too. We walked, which seemed like we walked forever. And he pulled out a rope, and he tied it around the Benji dog. And then he tied the Benji dog around a tree. And then my stepfather handed me a gun and told me to shoot the dog. I begged and I pleaded. And I begged some more. And I looked at the dog and I begged some more. Please, I don't want to be the one. I don't want to. I don't want to hurt the dog. Don't make me shoot the dog. He yelled at me and told me that if I didn't shoot the dog, that he would beat me. And I knew by now that his promises were exactly that. And so I told the dog that I was sorry. And I shot the dog at 5 years old. A lot more stuff happened when we lived in that little cabin on the edge of the lake. Lots of days that he would work us like we were grown men. 8-hour days clearing brush, carrying wood, you name it.